Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto actually inherited one of the powers kitsunes, the Shapeshifter, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Great King of Evil, link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. Uzumaki Naruto first realized that he was different from the others his age when he was 5. It was a particularly chilly night in what passed for a Konoha winter, as the land of fire was passing through the few weeks of snow it saw every year before swinging back to hot springs and humid summers. The orphanage had been an alright place to Uzumaki Naruto, but right then and there, he was damn cold. The boiler had broken down in its 4th decade of life, and was not due to be repaired for another few days, busy as it was for the mechanics during these few weeks. This meant the water that Naruto drew for his shower was nearly at the freezing point, something that was distinctly uncomfortable to him, bordering on painful. For a boy who was only seeing his 6th winter, Naruto had not yet built up the mental fortitude that was required to brave cold water. He yelped and hissed as the cold water impacted his skin, drawing back into a corner, hands instinctively moving to protect his groin from losing its body heat. Very reluctantly, he put his head under the stream of ice water, letting the life-giving fluid drip down the side of his blonde locks. He put his hands together to cup some more water, before smearing it across his body. It would have to do, Naruto thought to himself introspectively. There was no way he could go directly underneath that water, cold as it was. It was then that he desperately wished for a way to keep warm in the shower, warm enough that he would not be bothered by the shower. A way to keep more of his body heat in while still being able to wash off. To his amazement, he immediately felt his torso warming up. Curious, he looked down, and immediately yelped for the second time in as many minutes. There, on his chest, were clumps of blonde hair, and some more was still emerging, until his entire chest was full of gold. Even odder, it was a very dense coat of hair, what he might have described as being fur-like in its texture and uniformity had he tried touching it. Out of panic, Naruto turned off the shower. He didn't wish to be seen like this, with this hair that had suddenly appeared on his chest. He wanted it away, or else uncomfortable questions would be asked, questions he didn't have the answers to. Desperately, he willed it to be gone, as easily as it had seemingly appeared. To his relief, the hair quickly disappeared. One instant it was there, the next instant it seemed to meld into his chest, and the instant after that it was entirely gone. He kept his eye on his chest, expecting it to suddenly come back. When it didn't, he sighed visibly in relief. By nighttime, Uzumaki Naruto was sure it was just a daydream of sorts, and that it had not really happened. Even still, the incident would sit at the back of his mind. He would tell himself many times that he had just imagined it, but deep down he could not deny the truth. When he was 6, a rash broke out on his abdominal region, localized around his navel. While it was nothing harmful, the rash itched considerably, and he found himself tossing in the single bed that he had been assigned to at the orphanage. He had no idea what had caused it, given that he had washed his sheets only a few days previous. What he did know was that he hated the constant dull burn that the rash gave him, and he went through the futile efforts of trying to scratch the itch away. He tried slow scratches, fast scratches, light scratches, hard scratches, none of which worked. It was frustrating, and it kept him up for several hours. Damn it! Naruto finally hissed at the rash, the red spot clear underneath the white moonlight that streamed through his open window. Will you just stop itching already? There was almost a shimmer to the air, and Naruto could appreciate the idea of a face frozen with shock, as he looked at his hand that he had been using to scratch the itch. Slowly, the fingernails turned white, before hardening, then sharpening, narrowing, and curving into sharp points. His fingernails had just turned into claws. Oh, of course there were differences. For example, he still had the beginning of his fingernails, the stuff that was right above his skin, but anything that extended past that had changed into a claw. For several minutes, Naruto just sat there, his eyes wide. Many thoughts swirled around in his mind, but none of them made it to the forefront, leaving him numb. Indeed, it was too much for him to really comprehend, the result being his brain shutting down long enough for him to actually accept what had just happened. Letting out a deep breath when he finally reasserted controls over his skeletal muscles, he took in another deep breath, and let that one out again, before hunkering down to think. He had just seen the tips of his fingernails turn into claws. The shower incident flashed back into his head, and he compared the two incidents. Both times he had somehow changed his body through unconscious thought. They were relatively minor, gaining hair, and fingernails turning into claws. But what did that mean? Did that mean he somehow had the power to make his body change? It would bear experimentation, and throughout the night, Naruto tested many things, using the mirror in his bathroom for a reflection. It took a bit, But he finally clued into that the previous two changes had been after he'd been in strong desire for the properties that they both offered, the hair for keeping him warm, and the claws for scratching an itch, embarrassing, as it was once he realized the claws would hardly keep the itch away. His first change was to make his hair red. It ended up as a flame orange, so he willed again until it finally turned a vibrant shade of red. Quickly willing it back into his golden blonde color, he focused on something more complicated, turning the pupils of his eyes into slits, like he had seen on cats. Naruto stumbled back, as his vision changed in an instant, before catching himself. Previously, he had only seen the dark outlines of shapes in the background, with barely enough moonlight to highlight the difference between his blonde, orange, and red hair. But now, the colors were sharper than they had been before. That sent the dam bursting, and he began to toy with several ideas. He changed his hand into a paw, mystifying himself at how his human arm receded into a far smaller paw than the size his hand had originally been. His ear changed to become more pointed. He even managed to gain a few inches on his legs, making him finally able to see completely over the sink. But he stumbled when he tried to walk, unused to the new height. It was a satisfied Naruto that finally went back to bed, after having made sure all his changes had been reverted. He didn't know why he could do it, but he knew that now that he had this power, he would continue to toy around with it, and find useful purposes for it. When Naruto turned 7, he first managed to turn completely. He had found a river on the outskirts of Konoha that ended in a large pond, or perhaps a small lake. Surrounded by trees, he relaxed on the riverbank, stripped down only to his boxers, enjoying the feeling of the water slipping between his toes. Above him, rays of sunlight peeked through the dense green canopy. It was the splashing sound that caught his attention. Sitting up from his laying position, he took a wary glance around, before calming down. Off in the distance, he saw an otter swimming around. Before he could barely blink, the otter had quickly dived underneath water. A second later, the otter emerged, a silver glint around his teeth. Naruto blinked once, twice, then several times more, each in rapid succession. He watched, as the otter moved onto land, before chomping what he now identified as a fish between its teeth. The fish quickly disappeared down the otter's mouth, before the sea mammal started walking away into the forest. Envy filled him at that moment, a jealousy that he had not been expecting. The otter had made it look so nice and easy, swimming through the water, and then it had caught a fish within the blink of an eye. It had been some time since he had any sort of meat, poultry, or fish. He could get fish on his own by fishing, but he wanted to be able to get it as easily as that otter. An unbidden thought came to him: why not become an otter? He pushed it back, before suddenly letting it spring back at him. Why not? He had been able to morph and change other parts of his body. Could he go the whole way? Some part of his rational mind screamed at him that it was dangerous. He was jumping into the deep end, attempting to go from minor changes to changing into a mammalian animal that walked on all four legs, had a tail, and was adapted to swim in the water. He didn't care. For so long, he had felt driftless, and being able to change parts of his body had become a novelty after a while. If he could become an otter, well, that was a game changer. He waited for another otter to come around, and studied the seagoer. Webbed paws, a long tail, skin, and fur, black nose, whiskers, ears, he spared no detail, until finally he could close his eyes, and have a near-perfect copy in his head, not needing to rely on sight to visualize the otter. Naruto held the image in his head, modifying the shape and size ever so slightly so as to not be identical to the other otter, and focused on it strongly. A part of him could feel his body shift ever so slightly, but he didn't waver. He felt almost disoriented, as if the ground was rushing up to meet him, but still he held the image of what he wanted to become in his head, until slowly, but surely, he felt totally different. Opening his eyes, he was startled to see grass right in front of his eyes. Looking ahead, he saw a large rock, overlooking the water. He crawled forward, sluggishly, his limbs defying him, only slightly following his commands. With a great deal of effort, he made it on top of the rock, sprawling his new body out. Looking into the water, he saw the reflection of his head. Staring back at him was the face of an otter. He opened his mouth to yell in success. All that came out were squeaks and chirps. Startled, he fell forward into the shallow water. He tried kicking his legs, all four of his legs, not just two legs, for now, and barely succeeded in creating a float. It was pathetic, really. His saving grace was that he was in shallow water. Well, looks like he had work ahead of him. He would have to figure out how to control this new body. Now, to try turning back into a human. Swimming was freedom. Swimming was opportunity. Swimming was bliss. It had taken many weeks for Naruto to finally adapt fully to the body of an otter. Webbed paws and the large, muscular tail that all otters possess were new to him, and he had to use them, gain a feel for them, and learn all over again how to swim, this time in the body of the otter. Additionally, he had to at the same time both fight with, and accept the animal instinct that the otter possessed, lest he lose his own identity and self. But it paid off with dividends. Once he had finally gotten used to the new body, he delighted with lackadaisical swimming around for hours on end, occasionally slipping in some fishing time, where he caught fish and other seafood, before chewing and then swallowing the catch. The taste was different. It still tasted good, but the otter's mind seemed less worried about the taste, and more worried about getting food in its stomach. Naruto had encountered many other otters while swimming around in the interconnected rivers around Konohagakure no Sato. During his first few encounters he had somehow chased them off by accident, such an otter-like behavior that he had been displaying. Slowly, however, he managed to copy the mannerisms of the other otters he saw. The other mammals thought him a loner who had strayed in from somewhere. That was alright. It would have been worrying trying to throw off their suspicion of a new otter coming in from nowhere. It was interesting, too, as he also soon grew capable of distinguishing between the different otters. By the time his second month had passed, spending anywhere from 4 to 8 hours a day, as an otter after the academy left out or on the weekends, he had been able to tabulate 5 different families. He did not know the word for groups of otters, living in the small lake area he had decided to inhabit. Naruto made it into a learning experience, in any case. In the future, he expected that he would need to be able to transform into other animals, and learn how to act like that animal, and even live amongst their kind. Life as an otter was merely the first step in a long journey. When Naruto was 8, he finally found a word that identified what his power was: shapeshifter. It had been while he was looking through books on mythology that he had found the term. Mythology had fascinated him ever since he had first been able to read the tales of Izanami and Izanagi, and their marriage, and Izanagi giving birth to Amaterasu, Tsukiyomi, and Susanoo. Inari Okami, patron kami of fertility, rice, foxes, and many other items. The minor gods Fujin, Raijin, and Suijin, overlords of 3 of the 5 main elements that made up nature. The Rikudo Sennin of ages past, and the Jubi that the Sennin was constantly at war with. It quickly went down to mythological creatures, such as kappas, mischievous water sprites, or tengu, a bird-dog monster. It was when he found the descriptions of tanuki that he found the word. Tanuki were described as being mischievous and jolly, but were also shapeshifters. When the book went to elaborate on shape-shifting, as being able to change forms, Naruto's attention was quickly drawn to the words on the page, as he pored over them, and found links to the kitsune, and as other creatures supposedly able to shape-shift. And in fact, those 3 creatures were the only ones that the book identified as being shapeshifters. What followed was a week-long stakeout at the library near the orphanage in which he went through every book which he could find on tanuki, kitsune, and the power of shape-shifting, which admittedly wasn't much, sadly. Oh, there were off-references to other creatures that had the power to shape-shift, but nothing he could follow up on, and what there was on the tanuki, kitsune, and was limited, each book dissecting information from the others. But it got him thinking one day, as he looked at the mirror in the bathroom. He had always been curious about the tiny, mostly indistinct whisker-like hairs that protruded ever so slightly along his cheeks. Whiskers were supposed to provide extra tactile sensation, and with some touching and groping, he had found that next to his palms, they were the most sensitive part of his body. It wasn't quite like a tanuki might have, but a kitsune or those were possibilities. Could one of his ancestors have been a kitsune or a bakaniko somewhere along the family line? He understood enough of biology to understand that some characteristics from each of 2 parents were passed along to their children. Over time, however, a person had only very tenuous blood links to his great-grandparents or above, and a characteristic isolated to one great-grandparent or higher might only show up if it survived long enough, and his mother or father had married someone else who might have also had a similar characteristic to make that trait once again gain dominance. He knew his thinking was incredibly basic, but it was the only thing he could think of. A kitsune or could transform into a human, that much had been repeated over and over. It was an incredibly whimsical thing to think, too, that he might be part kitsune or part bakaniko, but it seemed to fit. How else could he be able to shape-shift like one? Regardless, he didn't know his true heritage, and it was a good thing that he remembered the singular truth of life: he was an orphan. Orphans might not have the life opportunities regular kids did, but they at least looked out for each other, to a degree. He had been taught by the older kids at the orphanage that nothing came free in life. If somebody offered him something, there were always strings attached. He would have to claw his way up to greatness on his own, or else mediocrity would keep him weighted down. But most importantly, if you have something valuable, keep it to yourself. Never let someone else know about it. He had the power to shape-shift. How many people were there who might try to kidnap him, and tried to use his talent to their own ends. No, he was unwilling to take that risk. Whatever the case, no matter how much he tried to develop his power, Uzumaki Naruto could never let it be known that he could shapeshift, not until he had enough strength on his own to defy all those who might try to use him. A few days after he had come up with his theory on his ancestry, a recruiter from the Ninja Academy had come by to convince the orphans to join the academy. The few orphans whose parents were known to be shinobi, most of them killed in the Kyuubi attack, were readily converted. Those who had unidentifiable backgrounds, such as Naruto, or who had mundane parents, which included several of his friends, were hesitant. The perks the recruiter rattled out were certainly enticing enough. Their own small apartment building that they would get rent-free until they graduated the academy, a free education, guaranteed work after they became shinobi, and kunoichi. But growing up in the orphanage had taught them that vital lesson: there was a string attached. In this case, it was the fact that they were expected to be the grunts of Konoha's military, the faceless members who would get the groundwork done, would never get assigned a famous sensei, and would be the cannon fodder for any war Konohagakure no Sato entered with another village. Naruto weighed the choices heavily inside his mind. He didn't want to die. He never would consider himself a coward, but ninjas had short life expectancies. He would rather live a long and full life, becoming more than just an orphan, Naruto. He wanted to become Uzumaki Naruto, and yet shape-shifting. The offer of a free, private apartment for his own use was enthralling. It would allow him to perform his shape-shifting without the fear of getting caught, as was the case in the orphanage. As a ninja, he would be able to learn the use of chakra, and, as he had seen several shinobi around town use them, perhaps he could somehow combine them with his shape-shifting. Even if his ninja career went bust, it would not be too hard to escape, even if he had to turn Nuke-nin. He had already tested it. If he fully shape-shifted, he did not have the same scent as his human form. He would have to forsake his birth name then, but it wasn't the name itself that was important, rather, it was that he will become great. In the end, he chose to go to the Konoha Ninja Academy. After his first few days at Konoha's Ninja Academy, Naruto was glad he was a shapeshifter. Before he had discovered his power, he had been prone to having the occasional rambunctious outburst. He had no doubts he would have worsened over the years, until he was near unable to focus. Shape-shifting had led him to read more than he had previously, especially on mythology and history of the land. That reading had tempered him, given him a direction. It also meant he could now start saving up money. Each orphan enrolled in the academy was given a small monthly allotment for their own ninja supplies and groceries. Naruto needed the ninja supplies, but not the food fish digested, as an otter would help to sustain his human form. He would refrain from spending money on food. He did not know what he might do with his savings, but he knew that more money was better than less. Slowly, several plans developed in his head. Some of them were short-term, some of them were long-term. He would lay low, but try to become strong. That way, he would be delegated to easy missions after graduating, missions which his skill set would overqualify him for. He would save up as much money as possible before retiring from being a shinobi, and use his money and his ninja training to establish a business of sorts. With his ability to shape-shift, he could sabotage his way to the top if need be. After all, financial power was one of many ways to become great, and he held no true love for Konoha anyways. True, they housed him when his parents died during the Kyuubi attack, but the orphanage had taught him well. Grasp the opportunity when you see it, and don't let go. Becoming a ninja of Konoha was all fine and okay, but he would not march off to his death for Konoha. At the age of 10, Naruto finally hit pay dirt. After 2 years at the academy, the teachers had finally begun to teach the concept and importance of stealth. Naruto had taken to it like a natural, scoring top marks on it in class. Being able to disguise yourself, sneaking around undetected, tracking other people, being able to cover up your own tracks. The reformed military police made up mostly of Inuzuka and Aburame had taken time to adjust, but their own unique senses allowed them to prevent most ninja theft against civilian homes and stores. But they had nothing on Uzumaki Naruto, shapeshifter. In executing his first heist, Naruto pulled out all the stops. He bought several pairs of clothes in a slow shop on the opposite side of the city. He morphed into several different fictional persons of about the same age, visiting the shop he planned to rob, a prosperous grocery store that would not notice 100 ryo going missing in small increments over a few weeks. He slowly memorized the layout and the mannerisms of the employees. A few nights later, he morphed into a common rat and scurried his way over from his apartment to the shop, not wanting to let any suspicious persons be seen in case the grocery store ever noticed the missing money. Once he made it inside the empty building, he changed into another owl, their night sight having been noted on several occasions at the academy. Gliding through the store on the small gust of wind that blew in through the open high window, he found his way through a few open doors, until he found an office of sorts. Most likely the office for one of the managers or the owners. What was pathetic was that they left the till out in the open. Even if it was locked, he already knew how to pick a lock. There wasn't even a camera in the room, letting him morph into an indistinct human form with its own separate scent. Rifling through the bills of money, he grabbed what he estimated to be about 2% of the value of the notes in the unlocked till, before morphing back into an owl. Although he had torn his boxers when he had first changed into an otter, he had, with a little bit of practice, been able to shape-shift his clothes along with him, the fabric melting into his skin. What was disappointing was that he could not seem to be able to shape-shift new clothes into existence. With some tests with common household objects, he found he could shape-shift several items along with him, as long as they were not too large, but he could not shape-shift anything into existence that was not an extension of his own body. He didn't understand the theory behind how some things worked, and some didn't. What he did understand, however, was that the Rio bills he had stolen melded into his owl form, and he would have them when he changed back into a human. A couple of forms later, he was safely back in his apartment. Life began to come together fully for Naruto by the time he was 11. The grocery store had somehow wised up, and had put in some more security precautions, making it impossible for Naruto to do anything more than steal a few of the fruits and vegetables from the aisles when he was tired of fish. That was alright. The grocery store was only one business in a sprawling military village of over 30,000 people. He had spread out his thefts so that a single business might only be hit once a year. He had successfully broken into a shinobi store for the first time only a month previous, taking several practice kunai, and a few, and scrolls on chakra theories. Nothing that the store would ever notice going missing, considering how run-of-the-mill all three items were, but significant in that he now spent nearly none of the monthly allowance he had. He had nearly 8,000 Rio, a significant sum. A casual meal at a restaurant might cost a single Rio. The small flat he lived in cost approximately 6,000 Rio. He could, and would have outright bought his flat, if it were not for the fact that it would attract attention. Where did he get the money? He would not be able to answer that. Instead, he had put 500,000 into an account at one of Konoha's financial institutions, marking it down as money made from odd jobs he had done for various citizens over the years. He could put in maybe 20 Rio a week, and that would be it. Meanwhile, he would have to either hoard the rest until later when he could use it without being questioned, or spend it discreetly in ways that the money trail couldn't be traced back to him. Another thing that had occurred was that the academy had finally begun to teach the students some of the basic jutsu. They had practiced using and flexing their chakra shortly after joining the school, but it was not until now that Naruto had the chance to harness it with an actual. The first of the three basis techniques that was taught was the Henjijutsu, which allowed somebody to transform into something else. Naruto snorted. It was merely an illusory technique, as it only changed his visual appearance. The theory behind it was rather dry, talking about manipulating reflected light waves to give the impression of something else. But it changed nothing else. If he grew 6 inches with the henge, then if somebody tried to put their hand where the head of his henge was located, it would go through thin air. Nor did it change or spread weight, or change smell. To the surprise of many, Naruto was the first in his entire grade level to successfully use the henge, and then master it, being able to change the shape and size of his henjito microscopic and macroscopic levels both. He wasn't quite sure why that was the case, but he theorized that it was because he was already good at envisioning what he wanted the henjito look like, from his practice with shape-shifting. The golden-haired shinobi in training was rather pleased, too, as it allowed him extra time to practice his kawamari and bunshin, and he was getting the feeling that his shape-shifting would be a major weapon in his future. With lots of tinkering around, he had managed to turn into a fly, and then a bear. There were still limits to the weight and size he could shape-shift into, but he was satisfied. He had also gone for longevity, trying to see if there was a time limit to his shape-shifts. The only constraint he found was that his shape-shifting apparently relied to a degree on his chakra, but it had only been after 3 weeks during his short summer vacation, as an otter, that he finally had begun to really dip in his chakra stores. Disappointingly, however, he seemed to have a mental crutch when it came to shape-shifting into a different human form. He had tried to shape-shift himself a stronger body, but to no avail. While he could get stronger muscles, as a bear, it just didn't seem to work while staying a human. It seemed that he could not wash away the unnecessary fatty tissues, and will forward more muscle tissues. He would have to work out in his true form to see the benefits in his other human forms. It would take more hard work than he had expected. That was alright. He had already decided that even with his shape-shifting ability, He would work hard to become an excellent soldier of Konoha in all the other categories of being a ninja, all in the name of becoming great. Being at his physical peak was just another thing to throw on top of the list. That summer, Naruto found himself at a small barbecue place with 3 of the few friends he had from the orphanage that had come along with him into the ninja academy. The 4 had ordered meat for their dinners, a rare delicacy given that most of the grocery money was spent on rice, wheat, and protein-rich vegetables. The black-haired Keisuke was chewing on his shish kebab, while the brunette Ichiro sat next to him, twiddling his thumbs, having devoured his light order when it came. Next to Naruto sat the lone female of the group, Kaori, resplendent in the strawberry blonde hair she had let grow out since the academy had let out. Once Keisuke had nibbled his way to the end of his stick, Naruto was the first to speak. So, how did all you guys do this year? Of the 3, only Kaori was in his own class, so he was naturally curious. Ichiro just rubbed his eyes, having laid his head on the table earlier, before looking up. Not as hot as I would have liked to, Ichiro admitted, before snorting. I studied, I worked hard, I'm athletic. But all those clan people have an advantage over us. They get their own tutors at home. They were taught for years before entering the academy. It's hard keeping up. Idly, he picked his fingernails with a kunai, nicking out the dirt that had gotten underneath. Kaori sighed next to Naruto. It was a sweet sound, especially to Naruto, whose hormones were only just beginning to kick into gear. Especially with, what is it, 4 heirs in our class, Naruto. 5, Naruto corrected her. Uchiha, Nara, Yamanaka, Akimichi, and Hyuga. Of the 5, however, only 2 were really competent, while another was semi-competent. A shame, really. He was near the top of the class, thankfully, and competition got his blood heated up. 5, right, Kaori said, picking at a string that had gotten loose on her t-shirt. That Uchiha is such a prick sometimes. I mean, yeah, he had really hard circumstances. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I can understand why he's so reserved, but he could at least lose the superior attitude. Next to her, Naruto held back a grin of mirth. He liked Kaori in a platonic manner, he really did. She was a real tomboy, something he liked. Besides, one less girl that worshipped Uchiha Sasuke, the better. I guess Keisuke finally spoke up. He had a rather nasal tone to his voice, something that was a bit hard to tolerate sometimes, but Naruto found him a genuinely good guy. He wouldn't trust Keisuke with his life, but he counted the boy as a friend. I found Bunshin and Henge rather easy. It's that Kawarimi that's a bit hard. Oh? Ichiro questioned his friend, eyelids blinking rapidly. Bad form, maybe? Nah, Keisuke shook his head. I can perform the replacement perfectly fine. His cheeks tinged slightly red, noticeable even through his light olive complexion. I kept tripping right after though. Kaori just laughed out loud. Ha, that's the funniest thing I've heard all day, tripping after using Kawarimi. Me though, I've had trouble using Henge. But you know, she took a sidelong glance at Naruto, and held it. Naruto here managed to perform the Henge successfully on the day. The instructors were baffled at that one. What, really? Ichiro asked, impressed. It had taken him nearly 2 weeks before he had pulled off his first Henge, and that 14-day period had been one of constant struggle and chakra exhaustion. Naruto just shrugged the comment off, having already had to waylay suspicion. Ichiro took the hint, and dropped the question. The Uzumaki took a look around at his 3 friends, before taking a sip of his water. As much as Keisuke, Ichiro, and Kaori were his friends, in a manner, he also pitied them. They were normal, and although they had the ambition, and the will to become great, like he did, the lack of something special like his shape-shifting meant they would have to work all that much harder to dig themselves out of the hole life had put them in. But what he really pitied them for was their family names, or lack thereof. Every orphan who had a family name held onto it, the only tenuous link they had to whoever his or her parents had been. However, the 3 fellow ninja in training that sat next to him had no last names. In the wake of the Kyuubi attack, the orphanages were overflowing with new orphans. Those who were yet at the age where they were truly aware, and who had unidentified backgrounds had to be given new last names. But with the influx of people of those status, there was a new decree. The orphans without last names could choose their own when they became legal adults, but until then they would only have a given name. He had been lucky. He was once told by one of the matrons that his mother had been somebody named Uzumaki Kushina, but he knew nothing more than that. A large amount of the records on the populace had been destroyed during the attack, and there was nothing about his mother in the archives. All he knew was that she was likely a refugee from the Edi village in the land of Whirlpool, where the name Uzumaki had been quite common before the village's destruction. He had tried to dig in, and find any hints about demonic creatures breeding into the village's bloodlines, but alas, there was nothing to be found there. Privately, he mused, it was a good thing that he didn't get any fox ears or tail if he was kitsune descended. If getting the ears, and tail was even possible. After the Kyubi no Kitsune had attacked, all the common vulpine species had been chased off from Konoha. It was with a sort of solemnity that Naruto bade goodbye to his 3 orphanage friends. As they finished lunch, he would go do some more swimming in his private spot, then do a little bit of work on the Bunshin, before perhaps executing another stakeout for some more jutsu scrolls later on in the evening. He had a feeling life would depend on his getting ahead, and shape-shifting was only one aspect of it. It was a windy day in Konoha, Naruto mused, as he walked down the street, intent on making it to his homestead. Although the summer climate ensured that it was a warm breeze, the wind would occasionally pick up, throwing fitful gusts at people, as if it were acting out with a tantrum. He himself had been victim to one earlier, the shifting air kicking dust up into his face, and ruffling his hair up big time. However, that also meant it was the perfect time to try out another shape-shifting form he had recently decided to do. Although the owl had been very fun, being the first time Naruto was able to achieve flight and glide through the air, it had its limitations. First off, the owl's instincts during the day were to sleep, and it took too much effort to fight that instinct. Secondly, the owl was a relatively slow bird, relying more on simple flight, lacking the capability to hit high speeds or do anything tricky with flight, though this was offset by their relatively silent flight. Third, it simply attracted too much attention to be an owl out in the day. So while he could be an owl at night, he wanted something else during the day. Reading, he had hit upon something that excited him, the peregrine falcon, described as one of the fastest known species of animal. While falcons were native to the land of fire, it was far more difficult for Naruto to just go up and find them in the flesh, as he had with otters. Instead, he relied on a couple of books he managed to find in the library, studying the pictures of peregrine falcons that were handily supplied by the dozen. He also looked at the behavior of the falcon. He hadn't exactly streamlined the process for both adapting to and fighting with animal instinct, but knowing how a new prospective shape-shift generally acted before actually transforming into it helped him to more easily meld his mindset with that of the animals. Of particular glee was seeing the list of prey for falcons. There were dozens of other birds listed, as well as some large and some smaller mammals. Although Naruto still enjoyed fish, eating some of it, as an otter, other times changing back into a human, and roasting his catch, he was honestly getting sick of it, and desired a bit more variety of fresh catches. Being able to slowly cook a skinned hare over a fire pit made him salivate at the prospect, particularly if he was able to nab some select spices for seasoning from any of the grocery stores. Having finally made it home to the apartment building, he made his way up to the 4th floor, where his flat was. Inside, he quickly locked everything down, except for one window. Shedding his clothes and putting them away, he sat down, making sure nobody could see him through the single open window, and crossed his legs, beginning to do some light meditation. It was always difficult to transform into a new species for the first few times, although Naruto had tried the peregrine falcon form a few times, as well as gone for a couple of flights. The Uzumaki still was not used enough to the falcon to be able to quickly shape-shift into it. Each animal had its own special kinks that he had to work out to more seamlessly transform into it. He could transform into an otter within seconds, and into a cat in 10 seconds. That night found a nude Uzumaki Naruto sitting in one of the forests that surrounded Konohagakure no Sato. He had made sure that it was deep enough into the dense woods that the smoke from his campfire would not escape the treetop canopy, and that the risk of a ninja or hiker stumbling upon him was approaching zero. He recognized the societal expectations that he wear clothes, but he was hardly concerned with it when he was not out in public. Perhaps having gone through the experience of being several animals, none of which wore clothes, had made it difficult for him to adjust, but he really did not care. He was what he was, and he would only change if he could see how it would benefit him. Naruto smacked his lips, as a delectable smell wafted from the fire, as the rabbit he had earlier caught, as a peregrine falcon, and then skinned, and gutted with a makeshift knife had been spit on a roasting fork. The golden-haired boy seemed to have a talent with roasting meat like this, as he always knew just when to rotate the fork, and by how much, achieving a nice, golden-brown color to the meat, while also having a properly cooked inside. It was a shame that he had not brought any spices with him. Gathering herbs from the forest was so painfully tedious to do, but even still, if the smell was any indication, the rabbit would be very tasty. Finally, the moment struck that Naruto felt his rabbit was perfect, and he moved to take the stick away from the top of the fire. Breaking off a leg, he decided to be ironic, and focus for a few seconds, sticking his tongue out. There was little visible physical change, but Naruto knew that what he had done, changing his human tongue into a rabbit tongue, would help significantly. Taking a bite out of the leg, he nearly shed tears, as his brain burst with the sensitivity of his taste buds to the meat. As it was, his eyes still threatened to water, and he hastily changed his tongue back. He had been experimenting with minor shape-shifting changes to parts of his bodies over the last couple of months. Cat's eyes, as he had experienced firsthand in the bathroom in the orphanage half a decade ago, allowed him to see certain colorful objects more sharply. The nose of many species had stronger reception to smells than the human nose did. The painting of the canine's tongue was one of the major changes he utilized often, letting his body dump out excess body heat more quickly when he was exercising. The tongue of a rabbit, he had found, was far more receptive to taste than the human tongue. He just had not expected it to be so strong when tasting the savoriness of rabbit meat, the sensation bordering on nearly painful from its intensity. Needless to say, he wouldn't be trying that again with anything else with strong flavoring. Allowing his senses some time to cool down, Naruto sat his head back against the tree, letting the cool night air touch his skin away from the fire, and began to ponder his life. He had been born on the day of the Kyuubi attack. His parents had also died on that same day, which really sucked for him, to have been orphaned on his birth. He had gone to the orphanage, and grew up there for 8 years. While it wasn't exactly all fun and games, he had survived, had learned how to harden himself, and protect himself against the world, and had made a few friends. While he was there, he had also learned about his shape-shifting powers, and successfully kept them hidden. Naruto had then decided to go to the Ninja Academy when prompted by a recruiter, where he had learned many things so far that dealt with chakra, the energy that was locked inside every human's body, as well as how to spy, steal, be stealthy, and many other things. He wasn't truly too concerned about becoming a ninja, but understood that the superhuman feats that he could do by going down that path in life would lead to better results than continuing to go to civilian school. He had stolen thousands of ryo over the years, and would continue to do so, funneling small bits here and there into official channels whenever he could. Once he graduated, and became a genin of Konoha, he would be able to make more official money. He hadn't completely thought past that, but now that Naruto was sitting down, and looking at it, he decided to plan further ahead. He would stay in the background, making a slow ascent to status, whereupon he would then be granted access to classified documents with lots of powerful techniques and state secrets. With the money he would have been able to scalp from unsuspecting victims, he would then retire. Here, Naruto modified his plans. Originally, he wanted to start a business, and somehow rise to greatness through becoming a financial power. However, he had begun to realize that the idea was rather impractical. Given the money he had, he would perhaps be best off by forging a new identity, and moving somewhere where there were few ninjas, such as River Country. There, he could invest the money he possessed, and buy out several businesses, and consolidate them. He would use his ninja training and shape-shifting powers to sabotage the competition and become important. Naruto thought to himself. He was being far too idealistic in his thinking. He wanted to be great, and he worked hard for it, but he knew he was still naive in some ways to the real world. His plans still needed developing, but becoming a financial emperor still seemed to be the path he would most likely follow. Summer finally left the land of fire. With it brought fall, as the leaves slowly wilted on the trees, the dropping temperatures acting as the harbinger of the few weeks of winter that would soon arrive. Naruto was in his final year of training at the Konoha Ninja Academy, and he was bored. Only 3 days in, and Iruka-sensei was still doing reviews over the last year, on the history of all things. While Naruto had appreciation for history, reviewing the trivial details, and taking up time that could have otherwise been spent on teaching more practical aspects was undeniably inefficient. Thank God he had been doing independent studying, or else the curriculum would have killed him with sheer boredom by now. He felt a light squeeze on his hand, and turned to look at Kaori, who sat next to him. She eyed him, before nodding towards Iruka. She had caught his attention wandering, and Iruka was talking about something she thought important. Now, Iruka was writing on the blackboard, the end of the year exam is simple. You need to pass with a minimum of 65%. 5% comes from the general quiz, while another 10% comes from your essay questions. 25% comes from your performance in the obstacle course, 5% from your projectile accuracy, 15% from your fitness ratings, 20% based on your performance in a spar with one of the senseis, and the last 20% from how well you can do the 3 basic, henge, kawarimi, and the bunchiner of variant thereof. There were groans all around at Iruka's proclamation, while the mere fact that each and every one of them was still in the program meant that they had some potential. As shinobi and kunoichi, very few of them could do well in all 7 of the categories that the scarred teacher had written down. Uchiha Sasuke was one of them, and it was the heir to one of Konoha's founding clans that Naruto eyed closely. He had heard of the Uchiha clan massacre, of course. Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's older brother, had apparently gone insane, slaughtering nearly every Uchiha. Less than a dozen members were left of the once great and noble clan, about half being shinobi who had been out on mission, and half being children who for whatever reason had not been at the compound that bloody night. Sasuke was special, somehow. He had actually been at the clan compound that night, but had been spared by Itachi, but not before being forced to witness his father and mother be skewered before his eyes. Not that anybody had specifically told Naruto this. It was rather amazing what one could pick up, as a cat, however. He had put the reconnaissance parts of the academy's lessons to rather good use. It was Sasuke who Naruto followed closely. The boy had the drive to grow stronger every day, and so Naruto watched closely, and copied his training methods, slowly adjusting it to his own needs. If Sasuke climbed up trees, Naruto would climb up trees. If Sasuke decided to improve his muscle mass through strength training, so would Naruto. Of course, Naruto could never quite explain why, but he appeared to have an extreme healing factor. He had once cut a nasty wound on his thigh, not severing an artery, but which still bled strongly. To his amazement, however, the wound actually began to sizzle, as the skin at the edges of the wounds slowly began to regenerate, closing up the injury before he could lose any more blood. The theory of building muscle mass had been touched upon in class, with tension from physical exertion creating microscopic tears in muscles, and the body overcompensating by adding on more muscle than was previously there. An interesting theory, and if true, it seemed to explain why his own strength grew in leaps and bounds, before finally hitting a ceiling, as his small frame and young age apparently limited any further growth. Was it perhaps shape-shifting at work again? Whenever he had shape-shifted into an animal, and back again, he didn't retain any of the small cuts and scratches he obtained from his training sessions. Maybe his shape-shifting also worked at an unconscious level, and whatever mechanism it was that repaired his wounds during his transformations also worked actively while staying human. He had tinkered around for 5 years with the power of shape-shifting, yet there was still so much more he didn't understand. Naruto Uzumaki thought himself a smart boy, but he had so far been relying on a handful of external info that related the power of shape-shifting to a few mythological creatures, and his self-observation. It was rather frustrating. He had become interested in the theory behind how his shape-shifting worked, after reading a scroll that explained the scientific details behind the chakra manipulations that drove basics such as the henge and kawarimi. He had hoped to derive a similar amount of detail through the scientific method with shape-shifting, but had come up with almost nothing. That left him with 4 options. The first was to bull rush his way through the problem, stubbornly refusing to yield until he finally got results. The problem was that it could take time, an effort that he otherwise couldn't afford to spend. Even with the experience he had so far, he still didn't understand how his talent, his gift, truly worked. The second was to do nothing. That quirk of his personality that had made him determined to be great made this unfeasible. The third option was to wait for now, and try again later. He liked this one the most. He might be able to hit upon a brilliant idea in, say, the next 5 years, or his general education would allow him to come up with better ideas. It hurt to have to put the issue on the back burner, but it seemed it would have to suffice. The fourth option wasn't really an option, but rather a hope that he could meet up with a fellow shapeshifter. Ideally, the other person would know all about how it worked. Even if he or she didn't, Naruto could still measure his power against the others, and any differences in how his and the others' shape-shifting worked would lead to progress in understanding it. But it was a faint chance that he would meet another person who would readily admit that he or she was a shapeshifter, or to stumble upon one by accident. Ow! Why did his shin hurt now? Oh right, Kaori. What was she trying to get his attention for now? Naruto, am I boring you? Ack. He had let himself get distracted, and had lost focus of what Iruka-sensei had to say. Perhaps you could come down, and show your usage of the bunshin to the class. You have, after all, stated that you managed to get it down over summer vacation. Well now, the cerulean-eyed shapeshifter thought idly to himself, time to shock, and awe Iruka-sensei with my success. He enjoyed the simple pleasures in life, and the impressed look he was imagining on Iruka's face when he succeeded in creating several illusionary clones would be, but one of them. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage, let out a low, uncharacteristic whistle, as he saw Uzumaki Naruto, the son of the Yandaime Hokage, create a half-dozen bunshin in his classroom. He had followed Naruto off and on a few times over the past years since the young boy had entered the academy, looking at his work in class. So far, he had been rather pleased. Naruto was close to being a clone of his father, only the slightly less angular frame of his face, and his unique circumstances serving to separate the two. In appearances, he was otherwise identical, and was only slightly more aloof than Minato had been, the rare moments of joy poking through whenever he talked with people who Sarutobi had identified as other orphans. The Hokage had originally planned on setting things up so that Naruto would be assigned to Hatake Kakashi as the elder male's pupil when he graduated and became a genin. However, the few aptitude reports that he had received so far on the son of Yondaime suggested it would be a disastrous matchup. Naruto needed a Jounin sensei who was disciplined and could keep him sharp and on focus. Kakashi, with his various habits that he used as coping mechanisms, simply wouldn't suffice. A ninjutsu expert, perhaps, somebody who could temper Naruto's growing chakra supply with power. And then there were the two teammates that Naruto should have. Somebody as disciplined as Naruto would need people he wouldn't constantly be in conflict with fellow orphans. Perhaps he would make a note when the time came to have Yumino Irika, Naruto's class sensei, come up with some ideal groupings. Of course, there was also the problem of the Kyuubi. He didn't think Naruto knew about his furry prisoner, given the law he had set out 11 years ago. Oh, of course there was an off chance that Naruto had somehow discovered the secret by himself, but the chance was near nil. The populace had also respected the law, and had treated the boy with just enough indifference that Sarutobi never once saw the golden-haired preteen be singled out. Taking out his pipe from his desk drawer, lighting it up, he walked away from his viewing orb, and towards the window, looking out at the vast village sprawled out before his eyes. Yes, he decided, when Uzumaki Naruto became a genin, he would have to be told about Kyuubi. It remained to be seen how things would go from there. But so far, Naruto seemed disciplined enough that the old shinobi, nicknamed the professor by some, the god of shinobi by others, was not worried about the truth coming out. Naruto palmed a fraction of a ryo in his hand, handing it over to the lady operating the fruit stand, taking a nice-looking apple off the top of a crate. Turning around, he let his teeth sink through the red skin, before taking a large bite, the crunch of his teeth clearly audible to his walking companion. "How is your class going?" Ichiro spoke up from beside him, and Naruto had to strain his ears to pick up Ichiro's quiet voice, which was nearly drowned out by the bustle of the busy marketplace. "All right," Naruto responded after swallowing the chewed-up portion of the apple, carefully choosing his words. "But I get the feeling that we are being babied from time to time. The physical training isn't really designed to push us hard except for the obstacle course run, and the limits they teach us aren't chakra-intensive at all." Was all Ichiro had to respond with at first, and Naruto knew him well enough to know that the lone syllable meant Ichiro's agreement. A few minutes passed by, the two walking through the streets of Konoha, before Ichiro spoke again. "It seems to me there are still several stragglers in the class, fangirls, and lazy people, if you will." Yet Naruto trailed off, the discussion over quicker than he had realized. It was amazing how he and Ichiro could speak so much to each other in so few words. Time passed, and the end of his days at the Ninja Academy approached for Uzumaki Naruto. Finally, the day of his graduation exam came forth. He breezed through the history exam easily enough. The essay question was interesting, to say the least. You are sent on a mission to a foreign land, with little knowledge of the area. How would you prepare for the mission? Obviously, the first thing would be to make sure he had as many supplies as he could before leaving Konoha. Thanks to the powers of many shinobi could carry around a week's worth of food, and hundreds of disposable shuriken and kunai in a single scroll that could be wrapped up and put in a pouch. Second, research any and all pertinent information surrounding the mission parameters and the destination before leaving the village. Once he made it to his destination, he should try to pass for a local civilian and reconnaissance for up-to-date information and the go-ons of the area. He should then try to design a plan to fulfill the mission objectives. If, for example, he had to assassinate somebody, he would need to tail the person, learn his or her mannerisms, and the like, as well as the security he had, whether it was a bodyguard or a fortified complex to hide behind. If he was to guard someone, he should find any and all possible threats to the person's life or well-being, and either neutralize or minimize the threats. After everyone had completed their written responses, the class was brought out to one of the training fields, where targets were already set up. Points were scored for accuracy, distance, and speed. While anybody could hit a stationary target with a bullseye given enough time, it was the people who could fire a shuriken from 100 yards with a quick draw from their tool pouch, and still hit dead center that would score full marks. It was a shame, Naruto thought to himself, that the academy did not try to move targets. That would have been far more interesting and realistic than the still targets that were offered. Next up was the obstacle course, which Naruto found to be his favorite part of the training the academy had given him, outside of stealth and deception. It was much like a playground, except it was designed to be physically stressful. Climbing up a rope ladder, crossing monkey bars, coming back down again, moving across unstable ground while putting foot after foot in small rings laid around, then having to climb up and down a straight wall with rungs in it, before finally crawling through small spaces. Whoever had designed it was a sadist, and it was too bad that he hadn't gotten into the rest of the academy curriculum. Naruto would have appreciated the day-to-day exercises being this strenuous, even though he recognized that it was challenging to the less physically fit. It took several hours, but finally everyone had completed the obstacle course. Naruto was fairly confident that he had scored top marks on that section. He believed himself capable of achieving the status of second or third best in class, and might have been able to become Rookie of the Year if he really set out to attempt it, usurping Uchiha Sasuke from his top slot. But he didn't want it. Doing too well in a class with several clan heirs would attract attention, and that would be bad for him. No, he would have to fudge his results over the next 2 tests, do a decent showing in the fighting, and make it appear that he was merely studious and trained hard. Naruto was quite honestly surprised at how much talent he seemed to exhibit at shinobi hood, and wondered why. Maybe one of his parents had in fact been a shinobi? Naruto let that thought fall off to the wayside. For now, he would have to fight, and hopefully not let too much come out in the process. Warily, he eyed the opponent opposite him. Inuzuka Kiba wasn't a clan heir, but he was close, being the younger brother of the clan heiress. The Inuzuka was a clan full of dog meme users, and they had specialized for tracking and direct assault in combination with their dog partners. Kiba had been forced to leave his dog out of the match, but it would still be a fun brawl. Iruka-sensei, who had been judging the spars, looked at both of them. "Are you fighters ready?" Kiba and Naruto both stepped into the large sparring circle. Being knocked out of the circle meant an automatic failure, so neither wanted to fall out. By unspoken agreement, most of the students didn't actively try to push their opponents out, instead opting to be able to have a full match. By the look in Kiba's eye, Naruto doubted that the brown-haired clan member would be any different. "Begin," Iruka intoned, and that was the spark that set off the keg. Naruto moved forward quickly, anticipating Kiba's brawler style. A probing jab was met with an arm block from the dog user, who attempted to grab Naruto's wrist, failing the attempt. The two circled around again, each looking for a fighting opportunity, before Kiba jumped into the fray, sending a heavy punch at Naruto. The unwitting Kyuubi grabbed Kiba's punch, but it was not without its drawback, as the force behind the hit sent him sprawling backwards. However, Naruto held on to Kiba's extended appendage, the result being both of them landing on the ground. Unwilling to let the spar become a brawl on the ground, Naruto rolled away before getting back up on his feet, facing Kiba again. He barely heard the heavy breathing of his classmates, who were still waiting for something big to happen. So far, both Naruto and Kiba had shown incredible restraint compared to some of their classmates, who had charged in from the get-go. Instead, the two fighters were still trying to size the other up. Naruto had to admit that it was difficult to spot a major hole in Kiba's form. There were minor holes, of course, but he was trying to look for a major one that could be exploited. Naruto decided to take a gamble, and came in hard again against Kiba with his own right hook. Kiba dodged by hopping to one side, then did a 1-2 punch combo against Naruto, who managed to twist himself enough that he was only lightly grazed. Naruto then moved his leg forward quickly, attempting to trip Kiba, only for that to shift most of his weight onto his other leg. There was a brief awkward moment, as the two had kicked at each other with off-weight legs, before both of them stabilized again, and tried to go for punches and elbows again. Honestly, Naruto thought it was shaping up to be a good fight. Neither of them had landed a decisive blow, but he had fought Kiba for over 5 minutes in close-quarters combat, wearing the brown-eyed boy down with punches, jabs, the occasional headbutt, and some other spontaneous tactics. Neither had tried using their legs after his failed attempt at tripping Kiba, but both had done well in defense. "Enough," Iruka said from the sidelines. "I've seen enough to judge both of you. Good job, Kiba, Naruto. Neither of you overextended yourself, and both of you kept your wits sharp, and your defenses strong." Naruto sighed, glad that the spar was finally done. There was no decisive blow, and he had shown enough to be judged as being strong, but nothing great, which was just what he desired to fly under the radar. The sparring was finally over, leading into the last part of the day, the tests. Each student was tested one at a time on the basic 3 that the academy taught: the henge, capable of producing an illusion which made the user look like a different person already; the kawarimi, which allowed the user to switch places with a nearby object; and the bunshin, which let the user create illusory clones of his or herself. Currently, it was Naruto's turn, and he entered the classroom, where Iruka-sensei and his assistant, Mizuki-sensei, were waiting. "Well now, Naruto," Iruka said, looking at the papers on the desk in front of him, "you've already effectively passed. However, your scores on this section will help us to determine your team placement, and Jonin-sensei, so do your best." Privately, he was pleased to see the blonde finally graduate. Naruto had been incredibly disciplined throughout his 4 years at the academy, and was the model student. Orphans had an incredibly hard time making it through the system, and coming out near the top. He himself had struggled, and it was only the fact that he had had prior training from his parents before they were slain by a swipe of the Kyuubi's paw that had kept him floating above the water. Naruto said in response to Irika's statement. Any in particular that you wish me to use first? Any order is fine, Mizuki spoke up from next to Irika. The rock to your left is what you should use for Kawarimi, but any other object in the room is fine. Alright then, Naruto spoke up. My first will be the Kawarimi no Jutsu. He brought his hands together in a single seal, and a second later he had changed places with the rock. Both of the testers blinked, surprised at how seamlessly Naruto had done it. Normally, academy students tended to crouch their knees beforehand unconsciously, as using the Kawarimi left a bit of physical feedback from the fast movement. But Naruto had done it while standing fully straight. Next up, my henge. I will not be imitating any particular figure, and instead will be using what I imagine the average middle-aged civilian would look like. Irika and Mizuki perked up at that statement. They had both seen Naruto master henge extremely quickly 2 years ago, so they were already prepared to give him full marks. His declaration of what he would be transforming into was interesting, however, as most other students had become apparent, one of the two senseis, or the Sandaime Hokage, another hand seal, followed by a small amount of smoke, and a male of average height stood there. He could perhaps be best defined as a farmer, given the small amount of dirt on his bare skin, and the strong physique that could be seen around his torso and legs. There were a few wrinkles on the man's plain face, dark brown eyes, and some short salt and pepper hair. Impressive, Irika said when Naruto turned back into his regular self. I have to admit, I couldn't see a single thing wrong with that. Mizuki? Mizuki shook his head. No, nothing. Full marks, it would seem, for usage of the henge. The two looked forward to Naruto's final match. The blonde obliged them. And finally, the Bunshin. Another hand sign, and 6 Bunshin showed up in the room, crowding the original. They stood there for a few seconds before dispersing. Irika marked down a few things on his score sheet, before looking up at Naruto. Well, Naruto, you passed with near full marks. You didn't really excel in anything except for the obstacle course, and your henge, but you had a solid showing in each category. Congratulations, Uzumaki Naruto, you are now a genin of Konohagakure no Sado. Black or blue? That last question was referring to the color of the headband Naruto wanted for his 8. Black, please, Naruto responded, and Irika handed him his new 8. The new genin left the room, leaving both Irika and Mizuki fairly impressed. 3 students later, the class was finally done, and were called back in. Alright, students, Irika said, looking around. Out of the 30 of you that were in this class, 24 passed. Come back a week from now at 9 a.m. sharp, where you will learn who your teammate will be for your genin team. That's all. There was an excited bustle, as many of the students quickly left, emptying the classroom considerably. Naruto walked over to Kaori, and quietly asked her, "Get together tonight?" The strawberry blonde turned her head towards him, but her eyes were still on the 8 she had in her hands, rubbing it prospectively with her fingers, as if still in disbelief that it was finally hers. Naruto waited for her to speak, which she finally did after a few minutes. Ichiro and Keisuke both passed, I know that. Hitomi and Masaki from class 3 did, as well. Jin and Ryu and Nanako as well. Any idea where we should go? How about camping? Naruto offered. He was privately amused, as Kaori snapped her head up, looking at him for a few seconds before a grin broke out across her features. I like how you think, she admitted, and the two broke out in laughter at that. It was a busy afternoon in Konoha's central administration tower. With the genin exams having finished, the 5 teachers in charge of each graduating class had quickly thrown together ideal 3-man teams, and with the headmaster, had come to get approval for each trio from the military leader of Konoha. Alright, the Sandaime Hokage said, letting out a light cough, as he finished with his tobacco pipe, exhaling the smoke. How many students graduated this semester? 118, sir, said the academy headmaster, one Nara Shirkato, as he brought out a binder with the dossiers of all the graduates. Enough for 39 3-man teams with 1 extra student. Sarutobi responded, opening the binder up. Skimming through the profiles, he looked up, and eyed Shirkato, as well as the 5 teachers of the 5 graduating classes. I have 65 lined up who can be assigned to mentoring duties, 22 of which have already taken a team previously, 8 who have done 2 or more teams already. Now, it is preferred that each team has 3 students from the same class, unless of course you have 1 or 2 students left over. But in special cases you may work with students from 2 or 3 different classes, if it is determined that personality or skill sets would clash too much with any classmates. There had in fact been one example a few years back with a user who had to be assigned to be the third genin on a squad with 2 members from a different class, given the overall weakness of use in the former's class. However, that is the exception, not the norm, so the circumstances should be great for me to consider approving such a team. Now, Sarutobi asked, who wishes to present their teams first? I do, said one teacher, who stepped forward. Hiruzen quickly identified him as Yumino Irika, who was responsible for the class that had most of the clan heirs graduating this year. It was also the class he had Uzumaki Naruto be put into, so he decided to pay more attention to Irika's team-ups and student profiles than he usually did. Very well, the Sandaime sighed, kneading his forehead, getting ready for a long meeting. When they had started, it had been shortly after the lunch hour. Looking behind him, Sarutobi was startled to realize that the sun had set beyond the horizon, the vibrant pink and orange of the sunset peeking out from behind the Hokage monument. With the exception of an hour break, they had been in here for nearly 8 hours. But it was finally done, with 39 teams assigned to 39 Jonin senseis. It was an ordeal, but they had gotten through it, even if he had to make a few large changes here and there. Taking a deep breath, and preparing his body to move around again, he spoke. So then, that is everything, correct? That should be, said Shirkato, who was on double-digit cups for tea consumed during the meeting, the famed Nara laziness requiring large doses of caffeine to stay both awake and attentive through such a long and tedious meeting. Sarutobi was about to speak again, intending to dismiss the senseis and headmaster, when his door burst open, and one of the chunins that worked the administration at the tower burst in. Hokage-sama! The brown-haired man shouted, ignorant to the other residents. It's an emergency. The forbidden scroll has been stolen. There was pandemonium at his words, but the Sandaime Hokage was quick to action, immediately issuing orders. The crackling fire spat out sparks every few seconds, discouraging most from sitting too close to the red-orange flames, as it licked at the firewood. Naruto was one of those who were brave, or perhaps foolhardy enough to do so, letting the waves of heat wash off on his face, ignoring the acidic smoke that threatened to make his eyes water. Fire was a thing of beauty, untamable, free to shape itself as it wished, constantly changing, spontaneous in what it would do next. Naruto didn't think of himself as being very poetic, but fire was one of the few things he could find symbolism in if prompted. The sizzling sound of cooking fish reached his ears, and he climbed to his feet, moving forward to turn the skewered fish around, letting it cook from the other side. Across from him, one of Naruto's old chums from the orphanage spoke up, illuminated under the moonlight that peeked in from the tree canopy. You look like you have a steady hand there with the fish, Naruto. Do you do this often? That was Masaki, fairly blunt. He was probably the most tenuously linked of Naruto's friends at the campfire, except for maybe Jean, but they still all knew each other well. A little bit, Naruto understated. Mostly when I wanted something with some fat, and butchered meat wasn't doing it for me. Masaki nodded. Save a little bit of money doing that too, I guess? Wish I'd thought of that, he let out a wistful sigh. Would have helped me out. And the new genin apparently doesn't make that much either. Not until they get some experience, and go on decent missions or become and start doing patrol work. A snort came from the side, as the tombish Hitomi spoke up, giving Masaki a steely-eyed glare. I should hope you have at least enough ambition not to be stuck doing patrol and guard work for the rest of your life. What? Masaki retorted instinctively, turning to face Hitomi, where blue eyes met brown. I'll have you know that I have enough guts to work my way up and make something of myself. Naruto watched on, amused at the situation along with some of the other kids, as Hitomi spoke back. Well, you better, or else you'll just be a deadbeat. There was a silent hiss from Masaki, and Keisuke wisely chose that moment to get up and engage in a quiet conversation with Hitomi, drawing her away from Masaki. There wasn't any real hate between the two, but Hitomi had been rather confrontational, and nobody wanted to be called a future deadbeat. Naruto definitely wouldn't have liked that comment going at him either. Looking around, he eyed the other kids who had shown up. There was Ryu, a boy who was sometimes singled out in class for his unusual black curly hair, idly sharpening a couple of kunai. The blue-haired Jean and fellow blonde Nanako were talking quietly to each other. Ichiro was facing towards the fire all by his lonesome, eyes closed, having dozed off, and on throughout the day, as the sun had begun to set. Meanwhile, Keisuke and Kaori were also talking to each other, while Naruto himself had somehow ended up being the person who was responsible for seeing that the fish cooked evenly and properly. Sharp ears caught the rustling in the bushes before anyone else did, and he spoke out a quick quiet, making everyone stop and look at him oddly. A few seconds later, the sound got closer, and others could hear the noise, as well. With instinct born out of academy exercise, those who had their tool pouches handy grabbed kunai and shuriken, while those without dropped into stances that would allow them to fight within a second. Though it was likely nothing, Konoha was still a shinobi village. It would pay to be cautious in the future, and they couldn't let themselves fall into the habit of being lazy now. Confusion broke out on their futures, as a familiar face came out of the foliage. "Mizuki-sensei?" Naruto asked, the confusion in his voice evident. "What are you doing here?" So caught off guard by the appearance of his silver-haired teacher he was, Naruto's eyes completely glazed over the large scroll Mizuki had on his back. Mizuki seemed equally surprised. "Naruto?" He looked around at the other residents of Konoha present. While he only really recognized Koiri, he knew some of them, as being students from other classes. The silver-haired was quick of wit, however, his eyes flashing to the fire, and he came up with a way to divert the conversation fast. "I noticed smoke coming over the treetops. I was concerned that it might be a wildfire, but I didn't expect to find several of you kids while investigating." "Nah," Masaki spoke up from the side, "it was the campfire. We were cooking fish over it, though Naruto's done most of the work for us." Naruto and Mizuki eyed the blonde curiously, surprised at the situation that chance had thrown into his hands. Quickly making up his mind, he decided the best way to cover his escape was to cause as much chaos as possible. "Now that you're all genin," Mizuki spoke up, catching the attention of everyone present again, some of whose focus had strayed once they received an explanation for the silver-haired sensei's presence. "There will be some important state secrets told to you. Most of them are fairly tame, C-class secrets that could be deducted, but simply aren't told to academy students, but there is an S-class secret that is told to new genin." "Huh!" Ichiro spoke up from the far end of the campground, body alert, his eyelids no longer drooping lazily. "What kind of S-class secret gets told to genin that isn't told to academy students?" "That hardly seems like it would be S-class to me, more like B-class at the most." Sharp Mizuki nodded. "It has to do with the QB attack." Several people sucked in their breaths, and Mizuki knew he had a captive audience. All of the orphans there were the last people to be orphaned from the QB. The next year's graduating class would have been born after the QB attack, and hence any parentless children in that class would have a different reason for their status. You see, the story goes that QB no Kitsune was killed in the battle against the Yondaime Hokage. However, there are masses of chakra. They can be temporarily purged from the planet, but they will reappear after a few years. The only way for the Yondaime to ensure the QB could not come back was to seal it away. "Seal it?" Keisuke quietly asked. "Well, I guess that makes sense. That way the chakra could be directed into something, and given proper protection it couldn't reform." His eyes narrowed, as he came to the obvious question. "But what did Yondaime seal it into? An object blessed by a Miko?" Mizuki broke out in mirthful laughter at that, drawing glares from a few who disliked his laughing at the topic matter. "Hardly," the man spoke, abruptly cutting off his chuckle. "Unfortunately, from prior practice, it was shown even the weakest of them could not be permanently contained in a simple container. No, it needs to be sealed into a living vessel." That declaration caught everyone off guard. With a sly pleasure, Mizuki noted the expressions on a couple of the new genins grow dark. He could practically feel the one dark thought they were quickly formulating in their minds: find the vessel of the QB, and kill him, or her. He had set up the situation perfectly, and that's what the S-class secret is about. Mizuki recognized the speaker as a boy named Ryu from another one of the classes by his distinctive curled black hair, which wasn't very common in Konoha. The boy was practically glowering at Mizuki, trying to force that last detail out of him, that the QB was sealed into a living vessel, and who the vessel was. From close to where Mizuki was, Naruto suddenly gulped, as he remembered a detail that had never been really important to him before, but now made all the difference. The day of his birth, which he had never bothered to celebrate, was on October 10th, the day the QB attacked. Adrenaline began to pump into his body for a fight-or-flight response if his fear turned out to be true. "Yes," Mizuki spoke, maintaining his composure, as long as possible, able to sense the mood shift in the camp, as a few of the genin began to awaken their bloodlust. As for the vessel, the Yondaime Hokage chose a newborn boy. Turning to face Naruto, his calm face suddenly became twisted, as the raw hatred that had been festering in him for several years was finally let free. "That newborn was you, Uzumaki Naruto." That Mizuki had been building up to it actually helped Naruto, if only because he had seen what the Chunin sensei had been getting at fast enough. As a result, he had been able to quickly shake off the shock at finding out that QB hadn't been killed, but rather sealed into him at birth. Senses keen, it was fortunate that he wasn't paralyzed, as he had to quickly dodge the thrust of a kunai, his hand catching another attempted stab. Wide cerulean eyes met green eyes. "Ryu, why?" The curly-haired boy gritted out, "You killed my parents, that's why," before punching Naruto with his free hand. The blonde had little time to feel the emotional impact of his fellow orphan's words, focused, as he was on blocking the punch with his arm, and generally trying to stay alive. As a result, the newly revealed QB host barely noticed the pandemonium going on in the rest of the camp. Fortunately for him, there was only one other person who was very obviously against him. Masaki and Keisuke were both restraining Hitomi, who was frothing at the mouth, her intent clear, as she had taken out some shuriken, only for Masaki to chop them out of her hand. Neither of them were particularly pleased at finding out what Naruto was, but both were rational enough to realize in the span of a few seconds that Naruto had no choice in the matter, and that his death might have consequences. They would figure out how the new fact defined their relations with the whiskered genin later. Kaori had come to the same conclusion as her two male friends, and had moved quickly to do the same as Keisuke had, only she was intent on helping Naruto restrain Ryu. The latter suffered from poor situation awareness, as he was hit on the head and smashed into the ground. "Wa Kaori?" Naruto asked, breaking through the haze brought on by the adrenaline rush. "Don't kill him, Naruto," Kaori said, her eyes glinting dangerously, and Naruto understood what she was getting at. Ryu, for all that he had just attempted to murder a fellow shinobi of the leaf, had his reason, and she wanted it solved with as little blood spilled as possible. But it still hurt that she wasn't siding with him against someone who had just tried to kill him, even if he understood why. Going on in all the chaos, Jin and Nanako had both stayed seated, shaken by Mizuki's revelations. The two had eyed Naruto in his brief skirmish with Ryu, before quickly talking to each other again. However, one genin had stayed seated, mind working overtime to analyze the situation. "And tell me," Mizuki-sensei Ichiro spoke out loud, having figured that Mizuki fancied himself a harbinger of chaos, "why, precisely, did you reveal it here, that my dear friend Naruto-kun is the host to the QB, instead of waiting for us to be informed, as we should have been by proper protocol?" The clamor in the forest suddenly stopped, as most of the genin turned to face Ichiro, his words suddenly waking them up. Ichiro continued to unravel Mizuki's intentions, as he stood up from his log, eyes wide open. "And tell me, what is that scroll that you're carrying for? I've seen supply scrolls before, and they can fit into the pocket of a flak jacket easily enough." The brunette trailed off, but what he had said thus far was sufficient enough for everyone to cast suspicion on Mizuki's intentions. "We're in a dense forest, Mizuki-sensei," Naruto noted, catching on to what Ichiro was saying. "How, precisely, would you have seen smoke rising from the fire when the trees caught it, when it was nearly sunset?" Mizuki was in a panic. He had expected more of the fox brat's friends to turn on him, especially given how theatrical he had been. Unfortunately, only one person actually managed to attack Naruto, and another was restrained, while the one brunette had called him out on his presence. He wasn't too worried about being able to fight the 9 genin present. While he was only he had spent years planning the heist of the Forbidden Scroll. He was sure he had left no trace behind for trackers to follow, but he still wanted to leave quickly just in case. The Forbidden Scroll of Seals, intoned by Keisuke, whose keen eyes managed to catch the kanji letters that labeled the giant scroll. "I don't know what that is, but it's a fair bet to say you shouldn't have that, should you?" Mizuki leapt into action before anybody else could blink. He slashed with a short tanto at Ichiro, who managed to get a pair of kunai up to block just in time. However, the strength behind the silver-haired man's blow was enough to push Ichiro back, and he tripped over the log he had just been sitting on. Mizuki turned around, intending to take out the girl and boy who were still sitting on the log, now totally paralyzed in fear. They took out a handful of shuriken, intending to throw them and puncture their throats, or, failing that, major blood vessels in their torso, until he felt himself get hit from behind. Feeling the weight on his back, as somebody tried to choke him, he grabbed his tanto again and stabbed his assailant in the arm. Satisfied with the yelp, he turned around, only to feel a slow, burning rage. "You!" He pointed his finger at the blonde on the ground, who was pressing against the deep cut in his arm, a wound Mizuki noted with anger. That was healing so fast he could actually hear it sizzling, as cells reproduced, and the wound closed up. "Just die already!" He attacked Naruto, only to feel heat touch his lower limbs. It was a quick kawarimi with one of the logs that saved his legs from being scorched, but he could feel the pain of temporary exposure to an extreme level of heat nonetheless. Turning around, he identified his assailant as that one brat named Keisuke, who was patting his throat. "Phew," Keisuke said, "I wasn't sure I would be able to do that fireball quickly enough." Mizuki clenched his hand around his tanto again, infuriated at how he seemed to be getting swarmed by the new genin. He was bordering on. He shouldn't have been able to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. A growl rose in his throat, before he took a deep breath to calm down. He needed to get away, quickly. Yes, his revenge against the Kyuubi didn't matter anymore. He would ignore the fox's vessel. He made to leap away in a shunshin, which would allow him to clear several hundred feet in less than a second, only to feel liquid fire erupt in his stomach. Looking down, he saw a mass of lemon gold hair, and his veins began to burn once more. He was trying to get away, but this brat kept trying to stop him. He pushed Naruto away from him, scoring another heavy blow on the blue-eyed brat's head, taking a slash to the stomach in the process, and took out his tanto once more, intending to finally end the Uzumaki's life for once, and for all. He never made it another step, as he was hit in the back of the head with a gauntlet fist. Tengu to base, the masked man said, speaking into a portable radio in his hand. Mizuki Toramaru has been neutralized in Sector 12, requesting assistance in taking him back. A voice crackled back through the radio, before the ANBU stashed his radio away. I came with the intent to take out a traitor to Konoha, didn't leave much for me to track, and I found several children at a campfire, several of which were fighting the traitor. Just what happened here? Silence dominated the clearing for a few seconds, before Ryu pointed accusingly at Naruto. He's the Kyuubi. Well, it's a good thing I requested backup, Tengu thought to himself, as he put together a rough idea of the events that had transpired. At breaking an S-class secret to stealing the forbidden scroll of seals. Quickly bending over, he picked up Mizuki, tying the traitor up with chakra-binding rope before the silver-haired former sensei could wake up, before turning back to face the child who had spoken. You think Uzumaki-san is the Kyuubi? Don't make me laugh. Yes, the Hokage said to his ANBU commander, the situation has been rectified. Mizuki Toramaru was identified as the thief of the forbidden scroll of seals, and has been captured. He is currently in interrogation right now. You can return to your regular duties now. As the commander left out a brief hi, Hokage-sama, and saluted before disappearing with a liberal usage of the shunshin, Sarutobi sighed, and turned to face the blonde figure sitting in the chair opposite him. His shoulders drooped, his head practically sagging. Uzumaki Naruto made a rather pathetic figure the way he looked at the moment, but the third couldn't blame him. It had been a rather emotionally crushing day for the newly minted genin. While becoming a genin was a positive, learning about a personal dark secret that was never actually told to you, and having it revealed in front of several of your peers was bound to outweigh that positive. Then Naruto had ended up nearly killing Mizuki in a berserk rage. Naruto, the Hokage spoke, idly fingering his pipe, trying to decide whether it was an appropriate conversation to be lighting up for. I imagine you're rather upset right now. The Uzumaki boy looked up, eyes usually alive now dull. Yeah, he agreed, keeping his response to a single syllable. The inflection from the one word was still enough for the village leader to identify the depression Naruto was feeling. Leaning forward, the Hokage tried to catch Naruto's attention again. He grimaced at seeing Naruto look down again, but decided to continue speaking. I apologize for the poor manner in which you learned about the Kyuubi. However, he paused, thinking his next few words over. It was something that would have been told to you in the next few days, as you would have had a very real chance of dying now that you are a shinobi, but Mizuki preempted us in that regard. His keen eye noted the tensing of shoulders and hands before Naruto let out another choked sob. The genin slowly composed himself, and a few minutes later Naruto looked up again to face the Sandaime, silent tears running down from his eyes. But why me? Naruto pleaded with the Hokage, desperately wanting to know the answer. Why was the one chosen to seal the Kyuubi into? Hiruzen Sarutobi sighed, and began to yarn his well-woven half-truth. Have you ever been told who your mother was? One Kushina Uzumaki? He knew Naruto had been told, and was satisfied to see a nod from the blue-eyed blonde. Kushina was in fact a kunoichi, a refugee of the Eri village, Yuzushiogakure, after its destruction, along with many other residents who came to Konoha. There were a handful of children born that night, but you were the only one with at least one parent known to be a ninja. Children of active shinobi generally tend to be more fit, and have larger chakra reserves at birth, and growing up, so the Yondaime decided to pick you. My mother? Naruto drifted off, before finally his eyes lit up, the first sign of real life that Sarutobi had seen from the Uzumaki boy in the meeting thus far. Does that mean you know who my father is? No, Sarutobi shook his head, nonchalantly telling the main lie in the conversation. Many shinobi and kunoichi do not marry, short, as our lives usually are. Often, when a kunoichi has a child, the father is unlikely to ever know about it, as the kunoichi wishes to keep her independence, and will often raise her son or daughter on her own for a few years, as a few years of mission pay can be lucrative enough to afford her independence. I see Naruto's response, his hands now clenching onto the arms of his chair. If my mother was ready to have me then, did she leave me anything behind? The Sandaime knew she had, but all of it had been declared under Namikaze Minato's name. However, he wouldn't let something like that get in the way. I believe she did. You might wonder why you never got any of it. At the time of the Kyuubi attack, there were many children like you who were orphaned. An act was declared so that the inheritance wealth would be temporarily appropriated to pay for the reconstruction, and would slowly be paid back, as those whose parents or parents could be identified would be paid back in full by the time they were adults. Given that you are now a genin, and legally considered an adult, if you report to the administration office you should be able to get the money, and the scrolls that I know Kushina owned. He would have to forge a few records, and get a small portion of wealth, and some of the scrolls taken out of Minato's old account into a new account under Kushina's name before Naruto took him up on his offer though. Naruto chewed on his lips for a few seconds, before hesitantly speaking up again. What if the people at the office hate me too because of the QB, and don't give me my stuff? The Hokage immediately saw what he was getting at. Tell me, Naruto-kun, throughout your life, has anyone besides Mizuki Toromaro ever treated you poorly, and unfairly in comparison to other people? Seeing a shake of the head, the Hokage was secretly pleased. Precisely. While some may hold a grudge towards you, they know better than to let it spill over into any dealings they may have with you. Mizuki was an exception. The man had already turned traitor, and using your friends to try to have you killed was also a ploy to cause more chaos. Naruto still looked lost. Mizuki mentioned an S-class secret? He said it was told to all new genin. A lie, Sarutobi said, having long since put away his tobacco pipe, but desperately wishing to light it up now. Well, it is an S-class secret, actually. I declared it as a state secret shortly after the QB attack. You may not realize it now, but that's what a demon vessel is usually known as. Sorry, is often considered a military resource. Keeping your identity secret to other nations was important, but it also allowed you to grow up among your fellow peers in relative anonymity. However, it isn't told to new genin. Only new who weren't adults at the time of the QB attack are told, although you can tell it to anyone you wish. Naruto looked down again, though Hiruzen caught a bit of a smoldering look. Go home, Naruto-kun. I realize this may be a lot to take in, but truthfully, things haven't changed for you. You aren't a demon, you're Uzumaki Naruto. The Sandaime Hokage of Konoha didn't realize just how much of a chord he had struck with Naruto when he said those words, but was relieved when Naruto slowly nodded, before walking out the door. Of course, he wouldn't trust the new genin on his own. Writing out some orders, he sent one of his private ANBU off to dispatch them. Uzumaki Naruto would have a rotation of guards watching him 24/7 for the next week, just to make sure he didn't slide into a deep depression. Sarutobi had grand hopes for what Naruto might grow up to be, and wasn't willing to let the blonde end his own life wallowing in despair. Uzumaki Naruto prided himself on many things. One of those things was being organized. His apartment was always tidy. His calligraphy was very neat. His class notes that he had accumulated over the years well organized, and most importantly, he had several cover stories to explain where he got the small amounts of his extra income that he deposited into the bank, complete with a ledger. Organization was something that he was rather keen on. If somebody were to walk into his apartment at that point in time, however, that would not be the first impression that person would get. Various objects littered the floor, some broken, victims of the sheer animalistic rage he had gone into once he had gotten home. It had lasted only a few minutes, but in that time, his anger truly had terrified him. His theory had been entirely wrong. Naruto had thought he was descended from a kitsune or a demonic beast that strongly resembled the common fox and cat, each of which were reputed to have the ability to shape-shift. It had been a solid idea, and he had stuck with it for many years, only for his world to come falling down on him. He wasn't part kitsune or part Bakeneko, he had the Kyubi no Kitsune sealed in him. The demon, being a kitsune, would have been able to shape-shift, and somehow that power had leaked out through the seal to Naruto. Naruto slumped to the floor, head resting against the side of his bed. What the Sandaime Hokage had told him was devastating. Sarutobi told him it hadn't changed anything, but it had. To his horror, he began to laugh. It wasn't a pleasant laugh, rather, it sounded broken, and he hated it. He loathed the fact that he was being so affected by it. So what if he happened to be the king of the... He had always strived not to be Uzumaki Naruto, but to become Uzumaki Naruto. He should have been able to put this behind him, notch in Kyubi container, as just another title he would make irrelevant in comparison to his name. But it was his shape-shifting ability that changed everything. It wasn't his blood. Rather, it was an ability taken from the Kyubi. His pride was one of the few things that defined his rather meager identity, and it was his pride that brought him into conflict with the fact that his shape-shifting defined his personal self, and was the foundation for everything he wanted to do in life, as well as the catalyst. And it was a stolen power. He unclenched his jaw, and opened his mouth, not willing to grind his teeth any harder than he just had. Not just his pride had suffered, his sense of belonging had, as well. Having one of the few friends he had grown up with over the years try to kill him was devastating. A part of him reminded Naruto that most of his other friends had at least stepped up to defend him, in particular Ichiro, but he had no idea what their true thoughts and feelings on the matter were. Sniffling, he looked out the window, moonlight washing in, bathing him in its ethereal glow. Finding out about Kyubi changed everything. He just didn't know what to do anymore. He felt like a vital support in his foundation had been pulled out, and everything had collapsed. He felt broken. Wiping some of the tear streaks off his cheek, now he understood why he had whiskers. He sat down against the wall. He didn't feel he could handle sleeping in the bed tonight, or any other night for the next week until he had to go back to the ninja academy. Slowly, his right hand rose until it was level with his face. It had been assumed that he had stabbed Mizuki with a kunai or other sharp weapon, but that wasn't true. Instead, he had shape-shifted the tip of his fingers right before the moment of impact into sharp claws, and had left 4 deep punctures in the traitor's stomach, before slashing him several times more. Naruto shuddered at the dried-up blood on his fingers, and palm that was only now beginning to flake off. It was hard to think that he had nearly killed someone tonight, an intelligent, thinking being. He definitely wasn't going to have an easy time sleeping tonight. The first day back at school following his graduation, and the incident was also his last day at the academy, but Naruto still had a hard time getting out of bed. It was difficult to shower for only the second time that week, and he had to force himself to make breakfast. Even the act of chewing on the cereal was tedious. That was because Kaori would be there, and he really couldn't face her. Not with both of them knowing what he was, and what he held, and the demon fox having killed her parents 12 years ago, forcing her to grow up as an orphan. Nothing like self-deprecation to ruin his day, but he got up anyway, and went through the motions of hygiene and breakfast, as uninspired as he was. Chugging down his milk, he threw the empty carton aside, not caring about his pristine floor for once, and walked out the door, his hair still a mess. Making it to the academy earlier than he usually did, he walked into his old classroom for the last time, and eyed the room. Only a couple of other students were there already, and neither were Kaori. Thanking the Camus, he sat in a different seat than what he usually took, and stared off listlessly into space. Minutes passed by, until line of view was broken by a familiar face. Paling, he looked up into Kaori's face. Cerulean eyes met forest green. He tried to pull away, but stopped, as he realized that what she was showing wasn't fury, but rather concern. "Kaori?" he asked quietly, lightly probing for what she thought about him now that the truth had come out. "It's Kaori Noboru now, Naruto-kun," she replied, and the honorifics caused him to tense up slightly. Kaori didn't miss it, and she walked around the desks, sitting into the seat right next to him. "You're worried about what everyone thought about what Mizuki said, right?" she murmured. "Yeah," Naruto said, still unable to say much, emotionally despondent, as he was. Kaori sighed. "We don't hate you, Naruto. Well, Ryu and Hitomi did, maybe Nanako, but one of the elite jounin talked to us, and made it fairly clear that you didn't have a choice." Seeing Naruto turn at her, wide-eyed at what she was saying, she continued, "Ryu and Hitomi will hopefully come around. Keisuke and Nanako both had their hesitations, as well, but they've warmed up. The rest of us, well, we know who you are, Uzumaki Naruto, not what you are, which is what that is." Naruto wondered why Kaori was afraid to speak Kyubi's name, unafraid, as she usually was, before he remembered the Hokage talking about the whole affair being a secret. Letting a breath out, he felt the weight of despair slowly slip off his shoulders. "You mean nobody hates me?" Kaori's heart nearly broke at the despondent look on his face, akin to a boy who had just lost his puppy. On Naruto's face, it seemed even worse. Grabbing his one hand in hers, she squeezed it in reassurance, one of the few body gestures she was sure of that would affect him. "No. We talked. I wouldn't recommend trying to find Ryu or Hitomi for a while. Give them time to sort it out, you know," she added, as she shuffled into the seat beside him, having since let go of his hand. "Who took it the best?" Naruto asked, slouching over his desk. "Ichiro? Jin? Well, me for one," she said, and for the first time Naruto began to feel revitalized, as he let out a small laugh at realizing he had annoyed Kaori by forgetting to ask her what she thought. Mentally an image of an annoyed Kaori turning red, and puffing up in indignation took all the strength he had not to weakly laugh again, and he barely caught Kaori's words, as she continued speaking. "Ichiro, sorry, I guess it's Ichiro-kien now. He was dropped off at the orphanage when he was 4, you remember?" Naruto did remember. Ichiro had told him a couple of times about the very vague memories he had of his parents. He wasn't affected, I guess, by it, so he was neutral in the whole incident. "Thanks, Ichiro." Naruto sent a silent greeting out to his brown-haired friend. The two sat there, chatting for a few more minutes, Naruto getting acquainted with the opinions of his other friends, some good, some bad, but generally he was beginning to be relieved. While he would have to talk to Ryu and Hitomi. None of the others had truly turned their backs on him, and that was something. During their conversation, the rest of those who had graduated had slowly trickled into the classroom, taking up the available seats. Naruto was surprised to look up during a break in his chat to find Yumino Irika, the class sensei, up at the desk, going over a few papers. He had looked up just in time, as Irika-sensei quickly rose, and quietly spoke, "May I have your attention, please?" Some of the class, such as Naruto and Kaori, heeded him, and stopped talking. Others, however, continued to make noise, such as the Yamanaka heir, and her pink-haired rival, Naruto noted. It had practically been a routine for them over the last couple of years to engage in daily catfights. The Scarred saw this and, slowly losing his patience, and used his demon head technique, an area designed to get the attention of others. Ichiwai, shut up, and pay attention. Naruto had not been able to plug his ears in time, and was left patting his head, trying to stop the ringing from the loud noise, as the rest of the class had turned to face Irika. Irika let out a light cough, holding up a piece of paper. "Now, as I was trying to say, you are all now new genin of Konohagakure no Sato. As most of you should know by now, you will be split into teams of 3, and assigned under a sensei, normally 2 shinobi, and 1 kunoichi per team. A couple of you will have to go on a team with at least one person from another graduating class. I will give you extra details later, as to where to go, while the rest of you will stay here, and wait for your new instructor. Is that understood?" Seeing that everyone was still too cowed by his latest outburst to speak up, Irika grinned triumphantly. "I thought so. Now, to start, Team 1 will be composed of." Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time, till then sayonara.